In this video, we're going to look at the two strategies for subtraction that I see the most in class. They're both fine to use, although I will recommend the strategy with the number line to many students, as it has a little bit more longevity and they can replicate it when they start working with decimal numbers or fractions or algebras or integers when they get into middle school. So the first misconception that we need to work with before we start is an understanding that when we are subtracting, we're looking at the difference between the second number and the first number. The importance here is that students have built an understanding when they add that they can switch the numbers around. So the sum of 4 and 5 and 4 is both 9. But when we look at the difference between the numbers, there's a difference between 11 minus 6 and 6 minus 11. And that's something that students will need to remember when they start working with the larger numbers. But I'll show an example of that with the second set of subtraction questions. So let's look at the question that we have here. So 11 minus 6 is equal to what, or what is the difference between 6 and 11? This would be one of our basic fact questions, the numbers between or below 20. So very important for students to master these. So there are two strategies. The first is very similar to a strategy that they would have used when they were adding. So students here will be looking to break up or partition the numbers. What's important with subtraction is for students to remember to only break up or partition the second number. And we'll see why with the example, our second example in this video. But what students want to do in this case, because we're working with the number 11, is partition the number 6 as the two parts 1 and 5. And the reason students want to use the number 1 here is because 11 has a 1 in the ones place, so right here. And what will happen when students start to work with this is that 11 minus 1 is 10, which is a really nice number for us to work with. And 10 minus 5 is 5. So by breaking up just that second number and working with friendly numbers, numbers that we know, we can find an answer of 5. So that's one way of practicing this type of question. The other way of looking at the difference between the second number and the first number, so 11 and 6, is to visualize this on a number line. And this will look very similar to how I learned to subtract, which in most cases was to switch the subtraction question into an addition. So here what we're looking to do, we're going to benchmark 10. So again, we see the same number 10 showing up, and then kind of look for the difference between the two parts here. So the difference between 6 and 10 is 4. The difference between 10 and 11 is 1. And then if I find the sum of 4 and 1, I get 5. So again, this strategy will be a visual representation of something that a lot of people are comfortable with. So just switching the subtraction or thinking of the subtraction question in an additive way. So let's look now at how students can use both of these strategies when working with larger numbers. So in this case, we're looking to find the difference between 38 and 75. So if we start with the strategy of partitioning or breaking up the second number, students will look at 75 minus 38, and we'll break up the 38 as 30 and 8. So the difference between 30 and 75 is 45, and the difference between 8 and 45 is 37. Where this strategy can cause an issue with some students is that 45 minus 8, we can still make some errors here in our calculations, but also what students have a tendency to do, because when they add, they break up both numbers, is that they'll try and do the same thing here. So they'll actually switch this expression, 75 minus 38, and break up both numbers. So they'll think about 70 minus 5 and 30 minus 8. But then what they do, because their brains don't like 5 minus 8, is they'll do 70 minus 30, which is 40, and 8 minus 5 instead of 5 minus 8, which gives me 3. And then they'll put an answer of 43 instead of 37. This is really, really common. And the best way to practice to avoid this, in my experience, is to either really push to partition only the second number. Their skills with addition and subtraction should be strong enough to do that, or to just use the second strategy. So if we look at it as on the number line, the difference between 38 and 75, again, we're going to benchmark a nice number. I encourage students to use multiples of tens or hundreds or thousands as much as possible. So we're looking for a number that has a lot of zeros in it. And then we find the difference between the two parts. So the difference between 38 and 40 is 2. And the difference between 40 and 75 is 35. And when I find the sum of 35 and 2, I get an answer of 37. Now, what's important when using this strategy is for students to really kind of strive, really push themselves to using only 2 partitions on the number line. Now, as they start to work with larger numbers, they might use 3 or 4 jumps at the beginning, but they should really try and combine some of those jumps to get to 2. And the reason for that is if we use 2 partitions on our number line, students will at some point be able to visualize the number line and work with these numbers mentally in their heads. And that's essentially the goal here. So I encourage you to talk with your child when you're practicing at home and see which strategy he or she prefers when working with subtraction. Either of these are fine as long as they're practice and students understand them and can apply them to different numbers. As usual, I've left a link to some practice materials on my website. Thanks for watching.